David the Brave sent their wish upon the wind, and each and every night the great fairy king Elohim heard their wish. But there was only one problem. There was only one child in all of fairyland who was worthy to be given to King David the Brave and Queen Christy the Kind. And that child was Prince Micah the Magnificent. All of the fairies in fairyland loved Prince Micah the Magnificent very much, and none of them, not one, wanted him to leave. When the great fairy king Elohim first told the fairies in fairyland that Prince Micah the Magnificent was to leave fairyland and to go to the world, all of the fairies became very upset. The multitude of fairies in fairyland angrily demanded that the great fairy king Elohim select another child for King David the Brave and Queen Christy the Kind. However, no matter how long or how hard the great fairy king Elohim searched, there was simply no other babies in fairyland who had the magnificence to be the perfect match for the king and queen. For the first time, the great fairy king Elohim did not know what to do. On the one hand, the truth in his heart told him that the time had come for Prince Micah the Magnificent to leave fairyland. Prince Micah the Magnificent was wise, gentle, and would bring great happiness to the lives of King David the Brave and Queen Christy the Kind. And King David the Brave and Queen Christy the Kind definitely deserved this kind of joyful happiness. On the other hand, the fairies all threatened to leave fairyland if the great fairy king Elohim sent Prince Micah the Magnificent away into the world. The great fairy king Elohim knew he could never allow this to happen. For what would fairyland be if there were no fairies there? Lameness, you know? There were many nights of unrest before the great fairy king Elohim came up with a resolution for this dilemma. One night, as he was pondering his conundrum, the solution suddenly occurred to him. The great fairy king Elohim decided to set up a race for any baby in fairyland who wished to participate. The winner of this race would receive wonderful and fantastic prizes. Whoever emerged victorious as the winner of this race would not only be born on earth, but would be the privileged baby of the greatest king and queen in all the land. In addition to the tremendous prizes, the great fairy king Elohim would personally give the victor special magical powers so his or her life on earth would be one of blessed happiness. The great fairy king Elohim thought to himself, yes, this shall be the solution to the whole ordeal. He thought about how great a race with prizes such as these would be, and how these prizes would attract the interest and participation of all the babies in fairyland. The fairies in fairyland would not be upset if Prince Micah the Magnificent won the race, because they would understand it would be a competition to receive great prizes. All the fairies in fairyland loved their race. The only question was whether or not Prince Micah the Magnificent had what it took to win the race. If he did not, this entire endeavor would be a disaster. The great fairy king Elohim was not worried, for he had full confidence in Prince Micah the Magnificent. On the day of the race, the great fairy king Elohim was amazed at the number of babies who stood at the starting line awaiting the start of the competition. The vast number of babies stretched out farther than the great fairy king Elohim's eyes could see, which was astonishing because he could see quite far. As the great fairy king Elohim finished counting the babies who entered the race, he was even more amazed. For there were more babies at the starting line than there were grains of sand in the desert. The babies began to jostle and fight amongst each other at the start of the race, competing to be closest to the starting line. But not Prince Micah the Magnificent, for he was patient. He knew that all good things come to those who wait. After a few moments of commotion, the great fairy king Elohim raised his hand to get the babies' attention so he could explain the conditions of the race. "Hello, babies," exclaimed the great fairy king Elohim. The great fairy king Elohim used magic to amplify his voice so all of the babies could hear him. He thanked all of the babies for coming out to participate. He told the babies that the race would be very difficult and there could only be one winner. However, the winner will receive an award greater than could be imagined, prizes greater than any that had ever been given out in fairyland. The great fairy king Elohim proceeded to say, "Whosoever emerges victorious from this fantastic race shall be given a chance to live on earth, the magical land where all things are possible. The winner shall be born to the most wonderful parents in all the land and shall be given special magical powers so that they may be able to make all of their dreams come true. This is the starting line. Along the way to the finish line, there shall be many tests to prove oneself worthy of the awarded prizes of this race. The first baby who enters the Eagle egg ship at the finish line shall be the winner. Good luck, babies." All the excited babies grew even more eager when they heard the words of the great fairy king Elohim, especially Prince Micah the Magnificent. Prince Micah the Magnificent had a moment of reflection just before the race began. He liked fairyland very much, and he had great love for the fairies there. However, he always felt there was a purpose for him beyond fairyland. The moment had come for the race to begin. The great fairy king Elohim lowered his arm to signal the start of the race, and the babies took off running with tremendous haste, except for Prince Micah the Magnificent. There was a fork in the road, and Prince Micah the Magnificent did not know which way he should go. Something in his mind was telling him to go left, but something much stronger in his heart was telling him to wait and see. So that was what he did. Prince Micah the Magnificent stood still and watched with patience as one half of the babies in the race went to the left and the other half went to the right. He watched as a large, heavy net scooped up those who went to the left and captured them beneath it. Then he watched as a giant hole opened on the road to the left. Those who escaped the previous net fell into the hole. Whew, said Prince Micah the Magnificent to himself. I'm glad I was patient. As Prince Micah the Magnificent chose to run ahead on the right road, the great fairy king Elohim smiled secretly, for he knew everything would turn out to be just fine. As Prince Micah the Magnificent continued to run further along the road, he saw an old fairy lady on her hands and knees crawling alongside the roadway. She looked tired and miserable. He had a heart of empathy and felt badly for her. He saw how the babies ran past her, knocked her down, and abandoned her. Prince Micah the Magnificent immediately stopped running to help the old lady fairy get up, forgetting all about the race for that moment. Get up, old fairy lady, I shall help you, said Prince Micah the Magnificent as he gave the old fairy lady a hand to get up. Sit over here on this log and I shall go fetch you some water. Prince Micah the Magnificent ran quickly to a nearby stream where he found a pitcher that sat on the ground beside the stream. He picked up the pitcher and filled it with water for the old fairy lady. He ran back to the old fairy lady, having brought the pitcher of water to her so she could have a drink. When the old fairy lady finished drinking the water out of the pitcher, he ran back to the stream to get more water so he would be able to wash the mud out of her hair. As Prince Micah the Magnificent was doing all of this, he thought to himself how miraculous it was that a pitcher was sitting by the side of the stream. He was filled with great thankfulness for this blessing. For if he had not found the pitcher beside the stream, he would have to bring the water to the old fairy lady one handful at a time. This would have taken quite a long time and would have used up a lot of the energy I needed for staying the course of the race, he thought to himself. However, Prince Micah the Magnificent would have done whatever was necessary to help the old fairy lady, for he knew this was the right thing to do. When Prince Micah the Magnificent finished helping the old fairy lady, he smiled at her and she smiled back to him. Although her skin was very wrinkled and she had no teeth, Prince Micah the Magnificent saw her face light up with the most beautiful smile he'd ever seen. The old fairy lady grabbed his arm, pulled him closer to her, and gently talked into his ear. Because you were kind to me, I am going to show you a shortcut that shall place you near the lead of the race. Go to the path over by that cherry tree and follow it to the top of the mountain. That shall place you near the lead, sure indeed. As Prince Micah the Magnificent turned to look at the cherry tree and along the path beside it, he reflected upon how happy he was that he had helped the old fairy lady. In a split second it took for Prince Micah the Magnificent to turn back around and thank the old fairy lady. She had disappeared. Wow, said Prince Micah the Magnificent to himself. It's a good thing I was kind. Prince Micah the Magnificent then turned to walk onto the path beside the cherry tree. However, what he did not see was the old fairy lady sitting high aloft in the treetops, sweetly smiling down upon him. When Prince Micah the Magnificent followed the path and reached the top of the mountain, he saw the great number of babies he had passed. He also saw the great number of babies still ahead of him. However, this did not trouble Prince Micah the Magnificent in the least, for it was a long race, and Prince Micah the Magnificent believed in himself. Prince Micah the Magnificent came upon a group of babies farther up the road. They stood holding axes, looking very disgruntled. The babies were looking at some trees as if they were contemplating chopping them down. Prince Micah the Magnificent could not fathom where they had gotten the axes. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Don't you want to win the race?" One of the babies who had been holding an axe answered angrily, "We don't care about the race anymore. We hate the fact that those babies down there in the lead were able to get so close to the starting line and we couldn't. It's not fair. So we are going to chop down these trees so they will land on their pathway and slow them down. Or maybe the trees can fall on them to knock them out of the race completely." As Prince Micah the Magnificent walked over to where the babies were standing with the axes, he saw below him, upon the winding road going down the mountain, he saw there were a great number of babies running ahead in the race. Prince Micah the Magnificent had a vision that when the trees were chopped down, the trees would block the roadway. This would not allow for a large number of babies to run through the roadway, and some of the trees would fall on many of them. "What are you waiting on?" another baby holding the axe said. "Grab up that axe and come help." Prince Micah the Magnificent did not want to help. This idea did not feel right to him. So he said, "No thanks, babies. It sounds to me like you are jealous of the babies in the lead, and I don't want to be any part of your plan." The first baby who was holding the axe said to Prince Micah the Magnificent, "Suit yourself." All of the babies began to chop down the trees in front of them. As they chopped at the trees, Prince Micah the Magnificent could see that the trees were not going to fall forward down the mountain as the babies thought, but backwards onto themselves. Prince Micah the Magnificent tried his hardest to warn them, but they refused to listen. The babies continued to ignore Prince Micah the Magnificent, and they kept chopping the trees. Prince Micah the Magnificent watched as each of the trees being chopped fell backwards upon the babies. "Good thing I am not a hater," says Prince Micah the Magnificent as he reflected on what happened and then turned to run on. Prince Micah the Magnificent ran on for a little while before he came across another group of babies standing around arguing about who was the greatest amongst them. "I am the best," cried out one baby as Prince Micah the Magnificent approached. "No, I am the best," screamed another. "Don't you babies care about the race?" asked Prince Micah the Magnificent. "Race mace, get out of my face, fool," yelled one of the babies. "I only care about being the best." The babies then resumed their argument about who was the best. Prince Micah the Magnificent scratched his head dumbfounded as he quickly turned to run away. He did not understand how one could be the best if they just stood around arguing about it. "I'm glad I don't need to boast," said Prince Micah the Magnificent to himself as he ran on as fast as his baby legs would carry him. After a little while running, Prince Micah the Magnificent came to another crowd of babies standing around trying to climb over a large boulder that blocked the road. The boulder was very steep and very slippery. It was extremely difficult to climb over. Prince Micah the Magnificent walked over to the boulder and attempted to pull himself up so he could climb over it. The boulder was slicker than he anticipated, so he immediately slid off it. "This is going to be hard," said Prince Micah the Magnificent to himself as he prepared to try again. It was then when he noticed the tiny tunnel that led under the boulder through the mud. This certainly appeared to him to be a whole lot easier than going over the slippery boulder. Prince Micah the Magnificent was perplexed as to why none of the babies were going this way. "Why is no one going through the tunnel below?" he asked one of the babies who had just slid off the boulder. The baby looked at him strangely and said, "If we went through the tunnel, we would become muddy and filthy. I personally cannot get dirty because when I win this race, I am going to be royalty." "But if you go through the tunnel, it would be much quicker," replied Prince Micah the Magnificent. "Quicker, slicker, you make me sicker," said the baby as he returned trying to climb over the boulder. "I have to stay clean. I am too proud and pretty to go through the dirty, filthy mud." "I'm glad I am not too proud and too pretty," said Prince Micah the Magnificent to himself as he stooped down to go through the tiny, muddled, and dark tunnel. There was a light at the end of the tunnel, so Prince Micah the Magnificent focused on the light as he crawled slowly through the tiny space. He was getting very dirty. He was also getting many bruises and scratches on his elbows and knees, but he did not mind. He just kept focusing on the light at the end of the tunnel. When Prince Micah the Magnificent finally made it through to the other side of the boulder, he saw a fresh set of clothes and a tub of warm water with soap inviting him to bathe himself. He also saw some ointment and bandages there so he could tend to his bruises. Wow, said Prince Micah the Magnificent to himself. If those babies had let go of their pride and were willing to get a little dirty and uncomfortable, they would be better off. Humility certainly is better than pride, he continued, repeating to himself. After he cleaned himself up and put on the ointment and bandages, Prince Micah the Magnificent began to feel much better. For the ointment and bandages were magical and healed his scratches and bruises immediately. As Prince Micah the Magnificent continued to run on toward the finish line, he came upon a long line of babies who halted their running and were standing in front of a huge gate. There was an old man fairy sitting by the gate entrance with a large set of keys in his hands. Prince Micah the Magnificent asked one of the babies who was walking toward the gate, "What is going on here? Why won't the old man fairy open the gate? He has keys, doesn't he?" The baby replied, "The old man fairy said that in order to get him to open this gate, we must tell him the magical words that shall open all gates. None of us know what those words are." Then with great sorrow, the baby told Prince Micah the Magnificent that this was his 4th time going through the line. Prince Micah the Magnificent smiled secretly to himself as he walked over to stand in the line that would lead through the gate.